When I inherited my grandmother's old house, everyone in town seemed relieved. Like they were happy to see it belonged to someone again, just not them. It stood at the edge of a hill where the road turned to gravel, surrounded by a forest of leafless birch trees that looked like bones in the cold. My grandmother used to say the place waited for winter. I thought she was just being poetic, but in reality, she wasn't. It was early November when I moved in, right before the first frost. The house smelled of cedar and old wool, and something faintly metallic, like snow before it falls. I told myself it was nostalgia. I hadn't been there since I was a child, but I still remembered how the hallways seemed to breathe every time the wind pushed against the walls. The first night, I slept in the front room, on a couch that sagged in the middle. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps on the floor above me. Slow, bare, but deliberate. I sat up and listened. Nothing but silence. Old houses make noise. Wood contracts, pipes knock. I told myself that as I laid back down, but my heart kept time with the memory of those footsteps. In the morning, I found 5 pale ovals on the inside of the window above the couch. Handprints, perfectly spaced. The glass was rimmed with frost, though the room itself was warm. I tried to wipe them away, but they stayed faintly visible beneath the condensation, as though pressed from the other side. By the second night, the footsteps came earlier. I stayed awake, waiting for them. They began at the top of the stairs and crept down halfway before stopping. I stood in the hallway, flashlight shaking in my hand, but there was no one there. Only the faint smell of cold air and damp earth. That's when I noticed the mirror at the end of the hallway. It wasn't mine, and I don't remember it from childhood either. It was tall, framed in warped wood, and its surface just cracked in a pattern that looked almost like frost spreading from a single point. When I walked closer, my reflection followed a second too late. I froze, moving my hand left and right. My reflection lagged again, a heartbeat behind. I told myself it was my imagination, but when I leaned closer, the mirror fogged up slightly, as if something behind it had exhaled. On the third day, I visited my grandmother's old neighbor, a quiet woman named Ruth. She had lived next door since before I was born. When I told her I'd moved in, her face fell, just utter shock. She asked if I'd stayed the night yet. When I nodded, she crossed herself. "Don't stay there once the frost sets," she said. "Why?" I asked. "Because the house remembers warmth. It doesn't let it go." She told me the story. In 1912, the winter came early. The family that first lived in the house, a husband, wife, and 2 children, were snowed in. When the thaw came, the townsfolk went to check on them. The fire had burned out, the wood was gone, and so were the bodies, not a trace left. The inside of the windows were covered in handprints, and just a brick skeleton. Ruth leaned closer and said, "Every few winters, someone stays there too long, and the house keeps them. That's why your grandmother never stayed past November." I laughed it off, but I didn't sleep well after hearing it. The nights grew colder, the wind began to whistle through the old chimney, low and steady, like someone humming. One evening I woke and saw frost crawling through the bedroom walls, not just on the window, but across the plaster itself, like veins spreading through the room. And then I heard the footsteps again. Only this time, they weren't upstairs, they were in the hallway. I got out of bed, barefoot on cold wood, and peeked into the hall. The air was thick and white, misting from floor to ceiling, almost impossible to see through. At the far end stood a figure, faint, like a shape behind glass. A silhouette of a woman in a long nightgown, her hair loose, frozen at the ends. She raised a hand towards me. The same pale ovals bloomed on the wall beside me, as if pressed from inside the plaster walls. I slammed the door and backed away. The doorknob was freezing under my palm. When I turned, I saw the mirror across from my bed. My reflection wasn't alone anymore. Behind it stood the same woman, her eyes hollow, mouth parted just enough for breath to escape. She whispered something, and I leaned closer. The frost on the mirror spread outward from her mouth, tracing words I couldn't hear. Then suddenly the whisper came from behind me. It's your turn to keep the house alive. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke in daylight. The frost was gone, the mirror was cracked worse than before, a long split running through its center like a wound. I packed my bags that morning and drove until I couldn't see the hill anymore. That night, I stayed in a motel an hour away. The heat worked, the lights were steady, and yet, when I looked in the bathroom mirror to wash my face, I saw it. 5 pale ovals on the glass, and my reflection smiling a second too late.